Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to this week's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to spend some time with me on the video. Always appreciate that, and I know it's a big commitment to watch these advanced bass fishing videos because it takes a little bit more time out of your day, so really appreciate you guys spending that time doing that. Guys, today we got a really good summer seminar for y'all. I'm going to talk about fishing big swim baits offshore in deeper water. Now, the technique that we're talking about today is for fishing the bigger swim baits like on offshore structures, like on points, on drop-offs, on ledges, that type of stuff. It's a really good technique. Probably, in my opinion, the best technique to catch bass if you want to fish offshore in the summertime of the year. You know, you're not going to have to live scope to do this. This is a hard structure video, and it's really produced some really good days for me. So what we're gonna do in the video today is I'm gonna show you my favorite big swim baits. I'm gonna show you how to set them up, all the components. We're gonna talk about the gear to use it on. And then in the second part of the seminar, we're gonna get into the type of areas that you wanna fish them on. So this is gonna be a really fun seminar by the time we get into it. Also guys, a couple quick housekeeping tips. If you guys like advanced bass fishing and you like the content and you wanna support the channel and give something back, a couple of the best ways you can do that, guys, just go into my link in the description of this video and use and bookmark my tackle warehouse link to purchase the stuff we're talking about here today or any other fishing tackle you may need. Guys, that's the best way you can support the channel, just by doing that. The channel gets a small percentage of the commission if you do that. And also, please check out our new Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns. These are breakdowns I do for fishthemoment.com. Gives you 40 good GPS waypoints to begin your search on. You can download them straight to your fish finder. And I've worked for years putting these things together. We got them for lakes all over the country, all 4 seasons of the year, and I'll put my lake map breakdown link in the description too. So really appreciate you guys supporting the channel by doing that. Big thanks from me and my family. Okay guys, this is a super fun way to fish, man. I've had this is a very situational deal when you're talking about fishing big swim baits deep, and a lot of people may not have ever experienced this before. But here's the thing about it: if you've ever caught fish, say in the summertime of year, you're fishing a big worm off a point, or maybe you're fishing a big deep diving crankbait off of points or ledges. If you've ever caught fish doing that, you can take a big swim bait and you can catch more than you can on any type of a crankbait deal. Now, talk a little bit about, I want to go into when you want to use this and why here a little bit later in the seminar, but specifically what I want to start out here just to get the seminar going is I want to show you the baits I use first, and then we'll get into all the practical applications about when you don't want to throw it here. Okay, it's pretty simple. I've got 3 different lures that I throw with this, and I've got 3 different rigging systems that I use with this. So I'm going to show you what they are. Excuse me. And we're going to get into everything more. The first one, guys, that I like is the big 7-inch Kitech. A lot of you guys have fished the little Kitech swim baits. This is the big mama. This is the big 7-inch version here. This thing looks awesome in the water. This is one of my favorite big ones to fish, and the other 2 are the Megabass, the 5-inch Spark shad here, and then the Megabass, the freestyle Magdraft, not the regular Magdraft. This one does not have a hook in it. It's a freestyle model. So those are the 3 ones we're going to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about rigging them here. I'll show you how I rig each one of them before we get into it. And again, guys, I'll link all these components in my tackle warehouse link. But here's how you want to set up. First of all, let's talk about the Spark shad here. Each one of these setups has a different head on it. But I use this Megabass body balance head on the Spark shad. It fits. I'll show you guys how it fits against here. Really nice. This body balance head was specifically made for the Spark shad. So you come through like this, and then you see how nice it fits against the head there. This is a super cool looking setup. Look at that thing. Really good. Megabass body balance head, Megabass 5-inch Spark shad. And you got this flat keel against it right here, which allows it to really skim against the bottom really good. I don't fish this, none of these guys, I don't fish these on for suspended fish. They're all geared towards fishing on the bottom. So that's why, they're set up like this. But this is my favorite setup, 3/4 ounce head. They will bite this thing big time. This is the first setup here. The second setup, I'm gonna show you how to do the Kitech. Now the Kitech, the body balance head doesn't work quite as well on the Kitech because you don't have the flat surface there. So on the Kitech, I usually just use some type of a larger screw swim bait head, which I'll link in there. I'll show you guys how this one sets up. One of the things about this, guys, when you're rigging your swim baits here, it's very critical that you take the time to get the bait on perfectly straight, because if you don't get it on perfectly straight, the swim bait will run off to the side a little bit. So make sure it comes out perfectly straight, just like that. Most of the time I will not use a weed guard. I'll trim the weed guard off of there. But this type of head here is going to be for the Kitech. There's a lot of different ones out there. I prefer this, you know, something like this or a ball head. But again, I'll link those in the description. That's the setup for the Kitech there. Excuse me. Dang, allergies and pollen are really bad right here right now. And then finally, guys, on the Megabass Freestyle, this is a little bit different. This is going to be a weighted EWG hook with a spinner on the bottom. Again, link everything in there. And this is a little bit different presentation here. Let me show you how to rig this. Now you can also use, you know, the jig head setup, the same type of a jig head setup, you know, on the Freestyle, but I prefer this little spinner deal here for the most part. So this one here, you're gonna screw this thing in the head like this. If you guys never use this, then you come through the little groove on the bottom. You're gonna have it set up like this. Now this is a little bit different strike attractor here, guys. You know, you got the spinner coming down here, and this, one of the things I like about the Freestyle here is if you're slow rolling these in the summertime, say you're slow rolling it over deeper grass bed like hydrilla or milfoil, this is a really good setup because you won't get hung up since it is weedless. Or if you're fishing maybe some deeper brush piles, something that's real snaggy on the bottom, you know, I like this type of setup. And the spinner really adds an extra attraction, especially if you're fishing on grass. There's something about the grass on the spinner that works really good. But that's the three primary setups. So I got the Spark Shad here set up, got it like this. Now I've got the big Kitech. Didn't push that quite up on there. Now the big Kitech is going to be set up like that. And also I do use a little bit of a modification with a dye on there. So you got the chartreuse marking pen. You guys may have seen me talk about this before. One of the things that I will do is I put some chartreuse dye down the side of these things and on the tail a little bit, but just a little bit on the tail, and it sort of gives it a nice little chartreuse glow there. It seems like in the deeper water, like when you're fishing it off points, a little bit of chartreuse on the tail like that, it seems like it just attracts more strikes. And you can do the same thing with the Kitech too. You know, you can put that same type of look on it. I usually always do this. I usually never fish these things unless I got some chartreuse on them here. You can sort of see the difference on there. It sort of just gives it some nice little color there. So that's pretty much the rigging on that. I'm gonna take a quick little break here and get a drink, guys. We're gonna get back into the tackle and the equipment to set it up in, and then we're gonna get into the areas and techniques. I'll be right back. Okay, guys, we're back. Now we're gonna get as far as the equipment you need to throw it on and also how you need to retrieve it. Now we're going through this pretty fast as far as the baits and the retrieve, because that is a small part of catching them on a big swim bait in the summertime of the year deep. The main meat of the video is going to be as far as the areas and the areas that you want to fish this in and how to line up and approach them. But you do have to get it set up in order to maximize how many fish you're going to catch on it. Now, first of all, you got to have the right rod. The rod that I use, guys, this is the Megabass Perfect Pitch. This is a 7'2" medium heavy action. This is the rod that I use for all three of them. It's got a good stiff butt on it. It's also short enough. Since it's 7'2", it's not really awkward, so you can manipulate and cast the bait good. It's a nice, powerful rod. Again, I'll link this in the description here. And then I pair it up all the time. Every one of my fish on 17-pound test Seaguard Vizex line. I found that I've experimented with a lot of different line tests on there. 15, stuff over 20. 20, it seems like I lose a little bit of feel. It's a little bit too thick. 15 seems a little bit light for moving a big mass of plastic like this. So the 17 is my favorite setup on the Megabass Perfect Pitch rod with it. Now, the thing about this is like, this is one of the critical elements here as far as generating strikes when you throw these out here. The way that I do it is I'll throw it out there, you know, on whatever structure we're fishing. I'll let it hit the bottom, and then I slowly start reeling a little bit. I'll reel 4 or 5 cranks like that, and as I'm reeling it, it's on the bottom, but as I'm reeling it, it slowly starts to come off the bottom a little bit, even if you reel it slow. So I'll reel it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll stop it and I'll let it fall back to the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, stop it, let it go to the bottom. So instead of I'm not just like dragging it. Since I'm reeling it, it's not dragging across the bottom, it's coming up off the bottom. I stop it, it falls back down, comes up off the bottom for a couple feet, falls back down. I'm keeping it probably within a foot off the bottom. And there's something about, I don't know what it is, but there's something about when that bait lifts up off the bottom and comes back down, that creates a good reaction strike. If you reel it too fast, where the bait is up off the bottom all the time, I don't get near as many bites. So it's very critical that you maintain contact on the bottom at least half of the time. You don't want it on the bottom. It's like you don't want to just like drag it along the bottom like a football head jig and keep it on the bottom all the time. And you don't want to be reeling it to where it's constantly coming off the bottom. But you want this fine line between hitting the bottom and coming off a little bit, hitting the bottom and coming off. It seems like that they will hammer it a lot better. And guys, when they hit this thing, a lot of times on those bigger swim baits, they will hammer that. It's like you'll reel it and all of a sudden, boom, you'll just see your line jump like that, or it'll just load up. It's one of the funnest bites that you're ever gonna have, you know, when you're keeping it on the bottom. There's something about a large bait, the fish think they think they gotta kill it. And it's more of a formidable piece of prey, so it's not like they just come up and inhale it. They actually try to attack it. So the bite on the thing is really fun with that. So it's a pretty simple setup as far as the equipment, you know, how you work it, how you set it up, that's pretty simple. But the meat of the conversation and the things you really need to know is where we're gonna get into now, which is where you wanna throw this thing, exact, specific set of situations, and that's all gonna add up to some big fish for you guys this summer. So we'll be right back and get into that. Okay guys, we're back into the the meat and potatoes part of the video. I know that a lot of these advanced bass fishing seminars I do, the interesting part of it is the lures and how to set them all up and that type of stuff. But the important part of it is always the last part, as far as where you want to throw it and understanding a little bit about the bass mood and behavior and personality. Now, one of the things about bass, if you guys watch the channel much, you hear me always talking about the mood and the personality of the bass. You don't hardly hear other bass fishing YouTubers talk about that. But guys, I can tell you from the decades of experience that I have in bass fishing, having a intimate understanding of the mood and the personality of the fish that changes every single month, that's a big clue into figuring out how you want to approach your strategy for the day. So that's always at the top of my mind. So here's one of the things you got to consider is when you're fishing these offshore structures. Now, I'm going to talk specifically about the structures here in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about when you want to throw these big swim baits more than anything else. One of the things about a big swim bait is I consider it a good mopping up lure. Now, here's how I usually approach it. If I'm fishing offshore structures in the summer that we're going to get to, I don't just have the big swim bait out. I've got my offshore lineup laid out there. So if I'm fishing ledges or breaks or anything like that in the summertime, I usually have a big worm, like a 10 or 12 inch Texas rig worm. Sometimes I'll have a big spoon. Sometimes I'll have a hair jig. Sometimes I'll have a big crankbait. Those are my 4 power fishing baits with that. And I usually start out with that. When you're fishing deep structure in the summertime, these fish are schooled up in wolf packs, depending upon the time of the summer. Now, normally what you have is in June, you have the biggest schools of offshore fish. And then by July and August, they start to disperse a little bit and the schools get smaller, but there's still schools. In June, you may have had a school of 5 to 15 bass, and in July and August, they disperse, and you're talking about schools of, around 5, a little bit more. So the first thing that you want to do in your summertime fishing for this offshore before you get into the big swim bait is make your first cast with a crankbait, a big deep diving crankbait, specifically in a brighter color, like a blueback chartreuse side, blackback chartreuse side. The aggressive fish that have not seen a lure, the biggest ones and the most will bite that crankbait right off the bat, but they're going to get conditioned to it. After those fish get conditioned to the crankbait, maybe if I caught a couple of them, or one or two or something like that, I may make a couple more casts on the same piece of structure with the big worm or the hair jig, or the spoon, just to get a feel for what the fish want. The fish are going to tell you what presentation you want. But what I'm really excited about is after I've made, 15 or 20 or 25 casts, whatever, with those lures I just talked about, that's when I go in there and mop up with the big swim bait. The big swim bait is a quiet lure. It doesn't telegraph itself. It's subtle. It's big. There's something about it that just appeals to a different part of the fish. When you're throwing a big deep diving crankbait down there, you got the rattles and you got the hooks clanging. It's pretty noisy out there. When you got the worm on the bottom, you got a completely different profile. If you throw the jig or the spoon out there, it looks different. But that swim bait coming through there looks like a big bait fish. It looks like a minnow. It's got a subtle vibration. It's just a little bit more quieter. It's a completely different type of a presentation as far as how it comes through the water column. And I have found that it will trigger bass that are conditioned to those other type of bass more than anything else. So if I pull up on a point and I catch a couple on a crankbait, say in 10 or 15 feet of water or a ledge, I know that I'm gonna catch a couple more on a big swim bait. Now, once in a while, if they're really keyed in on the swim bait, I'll start out with it right off the bat. But normally that's my progression. It's sort of in the lineup, and it's sort of the cleanup hitter in the whole lineup of power bait fishing I have for offshore structures there. One thing I did forget to mention as far as as far as the retrieve and everything, it's important when you get a bite on a big swim bait like that deep that you hesitate a little bit. And this is one time that I do set the hook pretty hard. You hear me talking a lot of my videos about I don't set the hook hard. I usually reel and pull into them. One of the things that you will catch more fish on a big swim bait is if you hesitate for just a second when you get the strike and then you set the hook pretty hard, because a lot of times you're dealing with the bait being a lot farther from the boat. So you're gonna have more slack in your line, even with the fluorocarbon. So the fact that you're farther away from the boat, your bait is in deeper water, and you got a big chunk of plastic there that you've got to move through that fish's mouth, you do actually need to set the hook pretty hard in a traditional hard hook set with the big swim bait. That's one of the few lure categories that I do that. But since you're dealing with a single hook, it's a larger diameter that requires more force, you do have to set the hook a little bit harder, so just remember that. Okay, let's talk about where you want to fish this thing at. And a lot of it just depends on your part of the lake, how your lake is set up. Now, I sort of want to give everybody a little bit of something based upon where you're at. So let's start down south and we'll move north. Now, if you're fishing down south, like Texas, Florida, all the southern lakes like that, you're probably going to be dealing with some element of grass out there. And grass can be a really good place to fish a big swim bait if you have deeper submergent grass that is set up just right. Now, first of all, before on any of this type of stuff, let's talk about water clarity before we get into that. The water clarity is key on this thing. You really need to have water visibilities in that zone of about probably, say, 2 foot to 4 foot is going to be ideally. If you gave me the perfect scenario for water clarity on a big swim bait, I would say about 2 to 2.5 feet, which a lot of lakes have that. So that's one thing to remember. If you've got a lake that has water visibility of under 2 foot, or if your water visibility is over 4 foot, your success on those big swim baits deep is going to be it's going to be quite a bit less. You're simply not going to get the bites. But that water visibility of 2 to 3 foot zone is just perfect for that. Okay, so your southern tier lakes, when you're dealing with grass, let's talk about a grass situation in the summertime. The thing that you need to look for on a big swim bait in this situation is some type of a grass edge next to deeper water, because in the summertime of the year, your vegetation is going to be topped out at the max, and it's not like fishing it during the pre-spawn where you have some big flats with deeper submergent grass where you can slow roll that. So one of the things that I like to do on a grass lake is I simply find the grass edge, especially if it's close to some deep water, and I'll make long parallel casts down that grass edge. Again, I'll let the bait go to the bottom. I'm usually using the freestyle Megabass that has the spinner on it, that has the weedless hook. Simply slow roll it down those grass edges. But that's a small percentage of the water that's going to fall into that category. The main water that we're going to talk about and the main technique that works the best is on traditional man-made impoundments. Now, there's a couple different type of areas that you're going to work on this based upon the lake. First of all, let's talk about the most obvious one, and that's the river ledge type lake. That's probably the best scenario for deep swim bait. So this is going to be pretty much refined to the TVA lake. So there's a lot of lakes. There's a bunch of people that watch this video that fish the TVA lakes. All you guys that fish Kentucky Lake, Chickamauga, Gunnersville, Watts Bar, Fort Loudon, Tellico, all of those, Nickajack, all of those river ledge lakes is sort of perfectly suited for a big swim bait in the summertime. And what you're looking for that is you're looking to fish that big swim bait in and around those river ledge drops or the creek channel intersections. Now, one of the things you're going to find out about in the summertime when you fish a river channel ledge is the fish are not necessarily on one specific type of area. Like, for example, if you're fishing Lake Pickwick or Wheeler or something like that, the TVA lakes, there's 3 different positions that those fish are going to be setting up on to be caught on a big swim bait. Number 1, they're going to be on the flat close to the drop-off, especially if you have some cover. So if you're fishing down at Lake Pickwick or Gunnersville or whatever like that, and you are on a flat that's close to a creek channel drop or an actual drop, pay attention to look for like stumps or shell beds or hard bottoms, because a lot of times in the summertime, you can be, say you got your boat right on that drop off. A lot of times I've seen those fish are up on that flat, maybe 50 to 100 foot up on that flat, and they're roaming around up there on that flat, even though it's the summertime, and they're feeding, they're on those shell beds, or on the isolated stumps, or on the rough bottoms, and you can take that big swim bait. And my favorite situation when they're up on top like that is the body balance head with the Megabass Spark shad on there. That's the one I like with there, because that body balance head will come across that rough bottom really good. And I'll get the boat on that, I'll put the boat right on the drop off, and I'll cast up on that flat, and I'll fish that flat all the way down through, the area that I'm fishing there. The second scenario with that is when those fish are going to be close to that drop, or actually relating specifically to that drop. Now, in a situation like this, most of the time the fish are anywhere between, say, 5 foot from the drop to being right on the break itself. And if those fish are positioned like that, what I do is I usually get my boat probably 5 to 10 feet off the drop, and I'll make a 45-degree angle cast, and I'll cast maybe 20 foot up on the flat, and I'll drag it down the slope there. And it's like as soon as it goes down that slope, if I don't get one, I'm going to reel it in. So those fish, they're not necessarily, they're relating to that break a little bit. They could be right on the break. They might be 10 or 15 feet up on the flat or close to it. This is where you're going to find a lot of fish in the summertime, especially if there's some type of cover there or some type of irregular feature. It could be like, again, a little ditch or creek channel intersection, a straight river channel that has some type of cover on it. But that's going to be your high percentage area. And then finally, guys, the third scenario is you're going to have the fish out deeper on those drops. So the fish are actually going to be in the deep water on the drop. And I've caught a lot of fish on Kentucky Lake and Lake Wheeler doing this, where you'll throw up on the flat, you'll come to the drop, the bait falls down into the river channel into say 10 to 15, 20 foot of water, and you're catching the fish on the bottom deeper off the drop. Sometimes they're on one, you're going to find them in one of those three areas. They're either going to be way up on the flat, they're going to be closer to the break, or they're going to be at the bottom of the break. Sometimes they're going to be suspended, sometimes they're going to be on the bottom, but that's going to be the main thing. Now, another thing I'll tell you guys about river channel fishing is that ever since the advent of GPS and side imaging technology, the fish, they're not on the traditional type of areas. Back 20 years ago, guys, you could go to like the Kentucky Lake and you could get a paper map, and any time that you found like a little creek channel that intersected the main river, or a ditch or something that intersected the main river, that creek channel intersection would be loaded with fish. But people have gotten so adept at setting up on those type of areas that all those areas are considered community holes now. Hold on a second, guys. I got a text here I got to look at here. I'll be right back. Sorry about that, guys. I had a text come through. You guys know I film on my cell phone here, so that's just sort of part of it. Part of the low-tech intuitive or advanced bass fishing here. So anyway, guys, those creek channel intersections, they've sort of become community holes. And they can still produce at times. I'm not saying they can't, but they're simply not as productive as they used to be. One of the things that you will find out in 2024, or the modern era of bass fishing with the advent of all the technology, is the bass they move to those river ledge areas in more less obvious places. So a lot of times they will position themselves and they will set up on just a straight section of creek channel or river channel ledge that doesn't have any irregular or unique features to it. They escape to those areas to avoid the fishing pressure. So in the past, it's like every fish in the lake, like on a Kentucky Lake, would be in and around those creek channel intersections or in and around some type of ditch intersection. But anymore, you're apt to find them anywhere. There'll be miles and miles of river channel, and they just may be randomly along that river channel edge somewhere. And that's why a lot of those guys that are really good with side imaging, they'll get out there and they'll idle along those river channel edges for miles and miles and miles, just trying to locate those schools of fish on those straight, nothing looking river channel edges. So that's one of the top areas to fish them in, is just on ledges. Now, a lot of lakes out there, if you don't fish the TVA lakes, if you have just a traditional man-made impoundment, you're not going to have a river ledge. But any lake out there, if you have a typical lake, like I don't care if it's Grand Lake in Oklahoma or Lake Norman in North Carolina or Hartwell or anything out there, you've also got a lot of really good summertime structures to fish those big swim baits on. Without a doubt, my favorite type of summertime structure to fish a big swim bait on in a traditional lake that does not have a river channel edge is on long, flat main lake points. This is prime areas for this type of fishing, and it's pretty easy to do. The only thing that I do with this, I approach it the same way as a river channel edge. I'll get out on those point ends and sides, and I just fan cast in various depths out there. And sometimes I'll graft the point a little bit, and I'll try to keep aware, and I'll try to figure out if there's much cover or if there's a break off the point or if many bait fish are using the point. The more activity I see, like bait fish or just fish in general or breaks or rough bottom, that's usually a pretty good area. And I don't really know the depth of the fish are going to be in, because in the summertime of the year, you're apt to get on a nice flat point out there with that big swim bait, and you may throw up into 5 or 10 foot of water and catch one, and then you may put your boat in 25 or 30 foot of water and catch one. I'll give you guys a prime example. I was down at Table Rock Lake last year fishing up the James River arm with a big swim bait. And I was on one of these long points out there, super long point. I mean, it went out in the lake a long way. And I was working towards the point. I was coming up around the point side, and I threw up there in about 5 or 8 foot of water, and I caught about a 2.5 pounder on the Spark shad with the body balance head on there. And then I didn't catch any more, and I moved out into about 25 or 30 foot of water, and I started noticing some rough spots out there, and I started noticing just a fish here and there, and I started fan casting out there in that 25 or 30 foot of water, and I got on a little school where I caught 5 on 5 casts in a row out off that deeper water. But on that same point, I caught one fish in like 5 or 6 or 7 foot of water, and I caught 5 or 6 out in 25 or 30 foot of water. So don't get locked into like one depth on a point. But one of the good things about those big swim baits is you can cover a lot of deep water in a hurry with them because they're big and heavy. So my favorite technique is on any man-made lake is I get out there on those big flat points, main lake points, and I put my boat usually in 25 to 30 foot of water, and I'm fan casting everywhere. I'll cast 50 times in various water depths, and I'm apt to catch fish in different water depths anywhere out there. But the flat points are going to be really good. Now you can catch them out there on nothing. There doesn't have to be any cover out there, but one of the things that I really like to look for is I like to try to stay closer to any type of significant break. A lot of times on those points out there, you don't have a significant break, but there's usually one part of the point that maybe breaks off a little bit more sharp than another. And usually a lot of times that's where those fish are going to be. And also, if you have any brush out there, anymore on most lakes across the country, people plant brush on points. And if I do find some brush, that's when I'm throwing the Megabass Freestyle through that brush with a little spinner on it. It's going to work pretty good with that. Now, the other type of an area that works really good, for the summertime fishing out there that I have found, and actually I won a big, it's called the Central Pro-Am Titleist Tournament on Table Rock in the summer doing this, is you can get out there on main lake flats, not with no point anywhere, just the flattest banks you can find on the main lake, and get out there on those flats and look for any type of significant drop on the point. Now the drop doesn't have to go like from 7 to 20 foot. It can go from like, say you're on a flat, gravelly, gradually sloping bank out there. It can go from like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 like that. And all of a sudden maybe you're in 7 or 8 foot of water. And then it drops down to maybe 8 or 12 foot over a course of like 20 feet or so. A very, very subtle drop. If you can find those main lake flats, and the flats, like I said, they're not real obvious. You can just look at your contour map and find the areas that you have your contours spread far apart. If you can find those main lake flats that have some type of a break on them, that can be a bonanza on a big swim bait in the summertime, guys. I've caught so many good ones on that. And the thing that I really like about those flats is that they get overlooked. It's like you can't look at a map and look at a flat and say, that's gonna be a good thing. So here's what I'm gonna suggest on it. Look at your map, your GPS, and look at the main lake, especially if there's a major creek around it. Get on the flat side of the lake and start just crisscrossing those flats out there. And you're looking for that subtle break. And if you find that subtle break, go old school and throw a marker buoy out on it, because a lot of times you can't set up on it. Come back around there with the big swim bait and fish that little subtle drop on there. Guys, I've caught so many big ones doing that a lot of people overlook. And that's sort of the way you have to fish now, because people have gotten so good at finding fish and locating fish that finding those subtle areas are the key, because there's no secrets anymore. It's like with the GPS mapping technology that people have now, you can look at your GPS map and you can spend an hour and you can find every good obvious spot on there. You can find every drop off, you can find every creek channel intersection, but sometimes on those flats, they're a little bit more subtle with that. But anyway, guys, that's all you have to do with it. I mean, it's just a simple way to catch fish. It's a fun way to catch them. It's a subtle way to catch them. It's something that, you don't have to have a lot of technology and equipment. You can do what I'm talking about, guys. You can do with a flasher. You don't have to have live scope. You don't have to have side imaging or down imaging. All you have to do is get out there and know how deep the water is, put that big swim bait on and go after it. So anyway, I hope it helps you guys catch a few, and we'll see y'all next week.